All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello, and welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, the talky and touchy-feely version of my book, PhotoWork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. I'm Sasha Wolf, joined as usual by my friend and producer, Mr. Michael Chauvin-Dalton. Good morning, Michael. How are you?
Good morning. Good. I've been driving all over the place. I picked up my son from college in Ithaca and then drove down to Philly to record a show, my own show. And then, we have honors convocation today and graduation tomorrow. And it's just sort of a nonstop back and forth.
Yeah, it's whirlwindy.
Otherwise, great.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Every morning I wake up like, where am I heading? Like, what part of the compass am I heading towards today?
Well, we got to see each other the other day, which was absolutely wonderful.
We were up on the third floor of ICP, just watching everything going on.
We were spying. We were at the ICP photo book fair, and we perched on this sort of catwalk area to watch all the goings on, and
that was fun.
Really fun. I thought that the book fair looked great. It was terrific to see so many fantastic publishers, a lot of really beautiful books. And I think I remember when the ICP book fair started, and it's really developed into a wonderful event. So congratulations to them.
It's really also an event where you can run into people you haven't seen in a while. Maybe you only see them once a year when they're at the book fair.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's set up very well where you can just talk and hang out with people and look at all the wonderful books.
Yeah.
Yep.
Everyone seemed to be in a very good mood, which isn't, at APAD a few weeks ago where we saw, some of the same publishers in the photo book section at APAD. That environment, although wonderful, is also very intense. And, you go over whether you're, seeing people at their booths or whether you're in the publishing section, people have a sort of overwhelmed sort of look. So
yeah, it does. It feels more high pressure. It does. Yeah,
definitely. So seeing folks at ICP, everyone seemed much more relaxed.
For whatever reason.
That was nice.
It does feel like that. Yeah.
And then I was with my partner, Jessica, and
I got to meet Jessica.
You got to meet Jessica, which is
that was
guys
wonderful.
Have been ships passing in the night before, but you finally got to hang out, which was really lovely. And I think
I felt like we knew each other for
definitely.
Years already.
Right, for sure.
Yep.
I think that we may have already started, laid the groundwork for coercing you into manual labor.
Well, you have some big plans and changes, and I'm happy to help out.
Okay. Yeah.
On the home front.
Jess and I are selling our house and buying a new one with just a little bit more land, also in Woodstock.
Yeah.
Sort of a swap, but we're buying a fixer-upper, 1950 fixer-upper, and so we're going to be counting on the kindness of friends.
I have lots of duplicate tools. I can leave some up there.
Okay. By the way, it was just Jess's birthday the other day, and I bought her a Sawzall. So that should, just say something about where we are in our life. But
Is that a first anniversary Sawzall?
Yeah, right. First anniversary Sawzall. 5-year combine.
Well, maybe first a sledgehammer. Yeah.
Right. Oh, man. Yeah, lots to do, but it's going to be really, really fun, starting with demo. Anyway, so, Michael, today's episode is really wonderful. It's a conversation with the photographer Eli Durst, and Eli is such a lovely person. I loved talking to him, and he's very open and generous, honest. And yeah, it was a real joy, I have to say. Just one of those episodes for me personally. I just had such a good time talking to him.
Yeah, so. I think the good news is I think this happens more often than not. The people we speak to, and I get to talk to them before and after the show with setting up and all. And we're just hitting a streak of such generous, wonderful people, to speak with. And I think that speaks to what the two of you speak about in this episode. And Eli talks about learning how to be a professional artist. And I'm not saying that, they're not genuinely nice people, but they also know that every exchange is an opportunity to, be gracious and respectful and helpful and generous, all those things. And Eli is definitely one of those people. I really enjoyed speaking with Eli off the air. And on that idea of being a professional artist and being someone who is intelligent and respectful and easy to talk to, you have a pretty intense conversation about the idea of what documentary is, how much to inform your audience about your work, how much to sort of let them figure it out for themselves. And it's a really good back and forth that you have.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, you guys work, there's a real opacity to it. Eli is really on the far end of the spectrum when it comes to, how much he wants to tell the viewer up front about what it is he's trying to say, what the work is, quote unquote, about. He's holding a lot back, including a complete lack of text and captions. So you don't even see titles, and it's intense. And I did push him a little bit on that. And I have to say, it's rare, as anyone who listens to this show knows, it's rare that I sort of challenge a guest. I really am so grateful to the folks who come on. I think you and I feel the same way about this. I'm not a journalist. I'm not, here to give my guests a hard time. They've been invited and
usually to celebrate something.
Yes. Yeah. And it's irrelevant for the most part, whether it's my favorite work in the world. I'm just trying to give people a platform to talk about what it is they do with the hope that it will be meaningful and resonate with our listeners. And certainly, if I'm being honest, there have been times where I wished I'd sort of pushed someone a little bit more, but for the most part, that's not what the podcast is. And we need guests to come on. And frankly, people have enough anxiety about it. And it's quite common that you and I have to really, and Noah, who's on our podcast team, we have to really talk someone into coming on. I mean, we deal with guests' anxiety about it constantly. So, I can tell someone who we want to come on, well, listen to some episodes, and I think you'll feel more comfortable. So I think if I were to take the role of someone who is really challenging the guests on their work, on their output, on their methodology, that would make it even harder to get guests to come on. So, you have to sort of walk that line. And I will say, though, this was sort of a perfect storm. I've known Eli somewhat for quite a while, and he is very confident. I think that's an important key to this. He has a certain confidence that's not easily shaken, and he's extremely good-natured, and I think he trusted me. And so, look, I don't want to set this up as though Eli and I had some really
on the ground grappling.
Right. In fact, it's a very brief part of the whole conversation.
Right.
But it was nice to feel like I had a chance to sort of push a little bit, and that I was dealing with someone with such maturity that, they were perfectly comfortable having that conversation with me. So it was really nice, I have to say. I want more of that, but it is I want more of the ability to do that, but it is tough.
You have to find that relationship very quickly in order to know how much you can push.
Absolutely.
When it's a guest who's never been on and someone you haven't had a lot of interaction with.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. So, and I don't talk to the guests ahead of time. You do. So, they don't know what I'm going to bring up. And
I just tell them to expect the worst. That's all.
Oh, it all makes sense now. Well, it's a really wonderful conversation, and huge thanks to Eli for being so wonderful and gracious and all the good things. So we have a lot of great episodes coming up. We're on a tear. Got a couple of curators coming up next, and some wonderful artists, of course. So keep listening, everyone. And Michael, I guess we'll get to it if you don't mind. Please take it away.
My pleasure. And here is your conversation with Eli Durst.
Eli Durst, welcome to the PhotoWork podcast. It's great to have you on. I've been looking forward to talking with you. Haven't gotten a chance to talk with you in years, I think, at this point. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is one of my favorite podcasts, and I love you and Michael are kind of like celebrities now to my ears. So it's an honor. It's an honor to be here.
Well, thank you very much. So much to get into. Your work is really sort of occupying a very specific space, and at the same time, I think very much its own space. And I don't think I've had too many guests who are really working in the space you are. So really looking forward to this conversation. But let's start, as we always do, and tell folks about yourself and how you got into photography.
Yeah, so I'm Eli. I'm originally from Austin, Texas. I started taking photography seriously in undergrad. I went to Wesleyan University and I studied with Sasha Rudensky, who I know you know, another Sasha.
Indeed.
And I just fell in love with it. And I went to Wesleyan to study cinema, moving image. It has a very famous program. And I was a little bit put off by how just industry centric it was, how much it was geared towards sort of going to LA and working within an industry. And at the same time I was doing my intro film cinema classes, I was also taking Photo 1, Darkroom. And the contrast was amazing. In my darkroom photography class, you could just go out into the world. And what was so exciting and maybe liberating to me was like, I felt like I didn't need to know anything. I mean, I didn't know anything. I was 18 years old. It's like, I didn't know shit, And it was just it's great to be able to learn from the world, to discover from the world without picking a genre or writing a script or doing all these things I felt like you had to know something about. So that's how I got into it, and I fell in love. And I don't know if I really knew, but I feel like I knew on some way this is what I wanted to do. And then I moved to New York City. I worked at Griffin Editions, a fine art kind of boutique printing studio in Brooklyn. And I also assisted Joel Meyerowitz, the legendary street photographer Joel Meyerowitz, for about 3 years, working in his studio. And at that point, I knew I really wanted to go back to graduate school. So I went to graduate school at Yale. I finished in 2016. And lived in New York for a little while afterwards, worked for Anmile, and then got a teaching job here in Austin. I'm at the University of Texas at the art school here. So that's what I'm up to. That's my biography. I'm happy to talk more about my work if that's. Well,
we're definitely going to talk about your work. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like it was Sasha who first showed me your work, actually. I just saw her the other day. She's working on an amazing new project, so shout out to Sasha Rudensky. And I love the way people in our community are constantly connecting one another. I think it's really beautiful, really important, too. So, well, I really, I have a lot of notes about your work, but you mentioned working for Joel Meyerowitz, and I heard you say about working with Joel that that's where you learned about professionalism and the seriousness and the rigor and what really goes into being an artist. And I actually, I think these things are really important. We don't talk about enough, really, the sort of the professionalism of it and what we mean by that. And, can sound sort of yucky, but I, as someone who represents artists, find it incredibly important. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I learned a lot from Joel. And when I finished grad school, I worked on Millet, and I think I learned a lot from her in the similar regard. But I was just so curious, what does it actually look like to be a photographer, to be an artist, to make a living, to keep track of your work? I mean, the way often photographers and artists make work in school or when we're young, it's kind of unsustainable in a way, or it's so complete. It just takes over your life. And what does it look like if you want to have kids, which I do? It's just how do you actually build a life and be an artist and maintain that creativity? And I think Joel was such an amazing example because he was in his, I guess that maybe early 80s, late 70s at that point. He's kind of ageless, his energy. I mean, he had more energy than I did when I was 24, 23. I mean, it's kind of shocking, but it just was eye-opening, and all the things behind the scenes of being an artist, communicating with galleries, museums, planning shows. I mean, I wasn't shooting with him really much. That, it was working in his studio, printing, preparing exhibitions, archiving, scanning, all that stuff. Also, here's another thing I learned, just how much work you have to make. How much, what you see is just the tip of the iceberg for someone like Joel, Right. He has all these famous images and books, but when you get into the archive and you see the others, the stuff that never makes it anywhere, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. This is a better photo than I've ever taken, and it's never seen the light of day. That's humbling and also kind of inspiring in a way. Just the amount of work. It is work. It's work,
absolutely. I think that it's really important.
And the name of the podcast, PhotoWork, it is work.
Absolutely. It's really important to always remember that. I think of myself as incredibly blessed to do the work that I do. I love my jobs, but that doesn't mean there aren't dreary parts. It all has to get done to keep everything tight and afloat. And it's really important to understand that. I'm not sure that always sort of gets across to folks. But let's move on to your work, because you have definitely become known through, I would say, mostly a series of books that you've done. And we wanted to talk to you today on the occasion of your most recent book coming out, I guess, a few months ago now. Yeah, The Children's Melody. Sorry, that's the most recent one. But I'm sitting here with a stack. So let's tell folks about your different publications and the type of work you make. I'd like to hear you describe it, and then I want to get into it.
Yeah, so I published 3 monographs, and they all revolve around, I think, stylistically about, sort of, and thematically as well, blending the languages of sort of documentary tradition with something more staged or intervened or constructed, and creating work that hopefully has this very strange ambiguity where you're not quite sure what's real. There's sort of an uneasiness. And I published 3 books. The first was The Community in 2020 with Morel Books. The second was The 4 Pillars with Loose Joints in 2022. And then in this past September with Gnomic Book, I published The Children's Melody. And to me, they're all quite different. I think they all revolve around the same questions. I think they're different approaches to some of the same underlying fundamental animating issues that I'm thinking about, which is, put succinctly, just how social forces shape us into who we are, and the sort of tension between individualism and collective identity, and the need to sort of belong with the tension of maybe kind of giving up part of yourself in some way.
Yeah, so tell folks really what, I don't want to say what the books are about, because I think that is what the books are about, but tell folks how they are sort of, what parameters you were using and what you were looking at specifically.
Yeah, of course. So The Community That was, which is my first monograph, that grew out of my work from graduate school. And I was photographing within kind of church basements. I started photographing Boy Scout meetings in Connecticut. And I had this idea sort of like, what if I just photograph anything that's happening within a church basement or these sort of church annex buildings, which are so mundane and everyday, but also so specific and so interchangeable. And if you're familiar with, kind of American suburban landscape, you're familiar with, these spaces. So I photographed New Age spiritual classes, Bible studies, Boy Scouts, corporate team building exercises, theater rehearsals, all these sort of different activities. And the idea with the work is, I think visually it's indebted to certain documentary style. I don't consider myself a documentary photographer.
No, definitely
I think the term
not.
is extreme. The term is obviously extremely problematic. I teach a whole class. It's like basically unpacking this term. But I am interested in the language of documentary, its authority, its proximity to what we think of as reality. But in the book, as opposed to focusing on like these individual groups, right? Here's the Boy Scout project. Here's the New Age project. I put the images together and it became a lot more interesting to me. It became a lot more interesting in conversation when you juxtapose images from disparate groups that feel like they could fit together. And so in my mind, what I was doing was just trying to build a fictional world out of these photographs from real activities, thinking that this could all be happening at one really bizarre community center. And then the second book, The Four Pillars, that a lot of those photos were made during COVID, during the pandemic, where suddenly my entire, MO of like going into these poorly ventilated basements with groups of strangers was not possible. It just wasn't feasible. And so what I did is I took some of the images I'd made of this New Age spiritual group that I'd been photographing for several years in graduate school, and I made pictures kind of inspired by them. And this is this group of, middle class, upper middle class, affluent, people in Connecticut who felt, despite these very, ostensibly comfortable lives, unfulfilled in some way. And so they would meet and discuss all these like New Age, kind of Christian ways of improving their lives or self-actualizing. And so I made pictures that were sort of inspired by them and paired the pictures. So that work is much more directed. It's more staged. It's a little more cinematic than the community. And I was really, with that project, I was really interested in complicating this dichotomy of staged and candid, which, as you know, as most of the listeners know, I'm sure, it's like it can be a very reductive dialogue in photography. Is it staged? Is it candid? Is this real? Is it not? And of course, things are so much more complicated than that. And so I got really interested in what I call like aspirational imagery, like holiday cards, maternity shoots, like these things that they're staged, right? When you get a holiday card in the mail, of course, implicitly, like, oh, this family wasn't just like frolicking in the autumnal leaves together in matching plaid. But I'm not, the photographer is not necessarily in charge. It's like there is a staging, there is a choreography. There are these, and like when you go back to Winogrand public relations, like there's all this, it's a lot more complicated, right? When you really start to unpack what is staged and what is not. For sure. And that really led me into the Children's Melody, which I'm looking at various children's, groups, young people, I'm defining like kindergarten through college, people who are still attached to institutions, and institutions are very visibly shaping them. And so I photographed a cotillion, church groups, dance recitals, school plays, ROTC, all these different organizations. I focused on young people for that project just because I felt with young people that sense of still forming who they were. I mean, we're always forming who we are, but with young people, it's so pronounced, it's so visible and legible. And that work really focuses on performances or more rehearsals, really. Just the idea that it's like we're constantly performing these versions of ourselves, and this, individual and collective identity is never fixed. It's always being negotiated. So anyway, that's a rundown of the 3 books.
I want to get into some of these bigger issues that you're raising, because of course they're really interesting to me, and I think they will be to everyone. But let's give listeners a sense of the way you shoot, because I will say that there is an Eli Durst type of picture. And I know that long ago you were shooting color film and that switched up. So can you describe the way you shoot now? Because I think it's really important for people to be able to imagine that and understand how important process is to what you're doing.
Yeah. So when I went into graduate school, I was shooting large format 4x5 color, available light, mostly golden hour photographs. And then when I left, I'm shooting black and white. I use strobes. So most of my photos, not all of them, but most of them have multiple off-camera strobes. So like when I have a Pocket Wizard, radio trigger on my camera. So when I shoot a picture, it will fire all these different strobes. And I'm putting the images in black and white, I should say. And it hopefully gives the photos a kind of strange, uncanny feel. And I think the reaction that a lot of people have to the photos is it looks familiar, but it just looks weird. It's like you're showing something I'm familiar with, but in an unfamiliar way. And hopefully there's that sense of sort of defamiliarization. Like you're seeing something that you've known about for your whole life, like, cheerleaders. I photographed cheer teams for this new book. But you realize, like, when you see it in a new way, how strange it is and how odd and how strange the world is that we've built for ourselves. So yeah, I'm often using lights in various ways. I'm often using them incorrectly or in ways that are maybe like aggressive or wrong. I'm backlighting things. It's definitely not like your lighting 101 class,
No.
Which I never took. So that's, maybe why I do it. But
no, it's very much like, wait, where's the sun?
Yeah.
I mean, it is really disorienting, if you stop and try and pick it apart. But I think, on first look, as you said, it's just strange. You don't really know why, but
yeah, it's not naturalistic. I had a student.
No.
I had a student once who was talking about my work, and he said, "Oh, I had a lighting teacher once who told me lighting patterns should always emulate like naturalistic settings." And I was like, God, that's the worst thing I've ever heard. Like that's the exact opposite of what I'm interested in doing.
Yeah. So you've said that you hope that the longer one looks at your images, the stranger they become. And I certainly think that's the case, although they start out pretty strange. But there's, another sort of, I can't say it's the absence of something else that's really contributing to this. And I think it's hard to unpack completely, but you have almost no text or no text in your books and no captions. So, you've gone all in on disorienting. And I'm fascinated by that. And one of the things that sort of popped up and made me laugh is when I was getting ready to speak with you today and I was reading different interviews you've done and whatnot online, I would see, the scroll of images between the interview text. And of course, right there under the images is a caption. And so for the first time with many images I looked at in the books, I was like, oh, that's what's happening, which I thought was funny. And, in some ways it was too late for me to have almost a pure experience with just the captions because I'd been reading so much about or so much of you speaking about the work. I already sort of knew a lot more. But if I open this book, if I, pull one of your books off a shelf in a bookstore, there's not a lot of clues. I consider myself pretty astute, but it's about as opaque as work can get. So how do you sort of reconcile what's of interest to you and what you just described a few minutes ago as being sort of the motivating force behind the pictures you make, which I think is really interesting. This idea that in the United States, and I know I'm going to say this somewhat differently than you did, but in the United States, there's this real emphasis on individuality, and yet there's also a constant sort of need to be part of a group, and there's this push and pull happening there, and a sort of ennui, of course, that I think is really present in a lot of your work, particularly the 4 pillars. But how do you think about this? You've gone to the far edges of saying to the viewer, I had very, very, strict parameters in place for this project. This is exactly what I was doing. but good luck figuring it out. Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, it is something that people have complained to me about. Like at exhibitions, several people have come up to me. And I guess I really hope it doesn't come up like I'm being obtuse or like intentionally cryptic. But I think I'm just... I work a lot editorially as well for magazines and newspapers, and the photos are indebted to a story, to a text, to a caption, right? And I think there's something that feels so liberating or free about making pictures that are not indebted, to a caption, and that you might know what a picture is of. Obviously, things like Boy Scouts are much more apparent, Mm-hmm. But I guess I just like the idea that you could lose yourself in the work and have no clue what is actually going on or why these people are doing these things. And the idea that it's not, I just hate the like one-to-one thing of like, oh, here's the photo. What is it? It's Boy Scouts. Here's the photo. It's cotillion. Like, I guess that to me would be that's like not the best way that's not how I would want to experience the work necessarily, And I think, obviously, if you're like you, Sasha, or like the audience, it's like you're so steeped in photography and fine art photography and you kind of know the deal. But a lot of people who aren't, I just feel like they're like, what's this? What's this? What's this? And it's just not that interesting of a conversation to me. And I guess I've always liked books that are just so ambiguous and open-ended and things. And all my books, I think if you look at them, physical copies of them, they're all sort of strange in a way. Like, I feel like you might not know what it is. Like, they don't look like the standard photo books, and that's by design. I guess I just love the idea that someone could stumble upon one of these books in a library and be like, what is this? Like, what is going on here? And that, for me, would be a very satisfying result.
No, it's really interesting to me because you are so hyper-articulate when you talk about what your work is about to you. I mean, that's the part that really struck me, is I just really enjoyed reading various interviews with you, and I listened to some lectures that you've given, and you are so good at talking about what a project means to you. So it's really fascinating, your desire to let that go at a certain point once you offer the work up to the viewer. In fact, it's more than letting it go. I mean, you've said you have a real desire to in no way dictate to the viewer what the work even is. And I will just say for folks, the work is incredibly formal. So the pictures in the world of fine art photography are very beautiful by many of the markers we would use. And so there is that seduction is there. I mean, you are giving the viewer something right away to hang on to, which is just these beautiful formal compositions. Everything after that is, is a tussle. But for sure, it's an incredible place to wind up as a viewer. And honestly, I'm not really sure how I feel about it. There is a real seduction that happened for me with your work, or happens. I've known your work for quite a while, not at the sort of level getting ready to talk to you today. But, I'm definitely hooked by your compositions and by... It's hard to say the subject because I don't often know what I'm looking at, but the setup, the situation. But yeah, then I do run into a certain amount of frustration, and I'm not honestly sure how I feel about it. It's your commitment is really admirable because you're not doing anything less than 100%. So
yeah, well, maybe I need to meet the viewer in the middle a little bit. But I guess to me, when you work in a language that is adjacent or there's a proximity to documentary, suddenly the conversation often becomes, what is this? And I guess when I think about the work, when I talk about the work, I'm less interested in talking about literally what this is. And, oh, this is the Boy Scouts. Okay, what's this? And I'm more interested in talking about maybe what's at stake in the pictures or what the commonalities are or, what sort of social forces are driving people to make decisions or, and I guess it's just with work that's maybe more rooted in like conceptual, like fine art, I feel like you don't have to have those conversations as much.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're right.
So maybe I'm just trying to free myself of that burden. But I mean, I do like talking about work, and I'm a professor at University of Texas. That has forced me to have to, be able to articulate things about work, other people's work. And so it's not that I don't like talking about it or that I wouldn't reveal.
No, you're very good at it.
I'm not trying to keep any secrets, but I guess I love music. That sounds stupid, but I love songwriting, singer-songwriter. I love, music
right there with you.
Where the lyrics are really important and meaningful, and I like reading them. And there are just some times where it's, many times over the years where there's a song lyric that to me is so powerful and evocative. And then you read a description of it or a songwriter explaining it, and it just ruins it. It just totally ruins it.
Yeah, of course.
And I just always wish I could go back to the point where I didn't know what that meant. Or, it'll be Bob Dylan or something like that. It's like, oh, that's just like, I just made that up. It doesn't mean anything, and it's like, oh my God, I thought that was the most profound lyric I'd ever heard. So I don't know, maybe some of it is an anxiety, a fear about closing the pictures down for people. But
but thank you for saying that, because that's really important. And this is what I wanted to sort of talk about. I mean, I think you're so perfectly suited to have this discussion. And I don't know that I've really had this discussion on the podcast before, but what does it mean to open up or close down a picture for the viewer? And I think what you just described is so helpful and so spot on. It's like, of course, yeah, we have these experiences. We listen to a beautiful song and it means something to us. It relates to our life. And then do you want to know what the songwriter, what it meant to them? Well, as you say, often that's not actually a win for you. And so, I think that a lot of fine art photographers are often in this exact position. And I think it's always a, strange negotiation. And, so I really appreciate you talking about this, because I think, your commitment to where you've wound up, at least right now in your career, I really admire. If you and I were working together, I might try and push you on the continuum a little bit more the other way. But I don't know exactly myself what that would look like. And of course, the conversation that this is sort of, you and I are sort of circling around, which is, what is the truth? And does truth exist in photography, is ultimately really what we're talking about, right? And that's conversation we'll be having for all of time. I mean, I think that, if I may say so, I think your belief is it really doesn't exist. I think my belief is it really does exist. And so, but of course, it's something that, if we were in a debate club, I could probably argue fairly well from both sides.
Well, I know that's a great point, and I value your opinion. I think you are someone, Sasha, who got the work early on before a lot of people did. I mean, I think we first met way back in 2016. But I wouldn't argue that truths don't exist, but just trying to complicate our understanding of what makes a picture true and what makes it false. Thinking again about photographing, I have a photograph in the Children's Melody of a cheer stunt, like a pyramid. Mm-hmm. And
I love that picture. It's great.
Thank you. And so, that was, I showed up to a practice, a rehearsal, and I don't really think of myself as staging. I think of it more as intervening in some way, like altering or tipping. And so what I did was I just asked them to hold that pyramid as long as they possibly could. And at a certain point, the smiles fall away, and the base,
the sweat
the young women, the young women at the base, right, holding them up are quivering and shaking. And that illusion of effortless grace and perfection and beauty, hopefully it reveals itself to be a performance, right? A facade. Yeah. But that's not to say it's not true. And, that picture is about precarity, about the idea that at any second, and eventually it did happen, the base can't hold it can't support the illusion anymore. And the person falls. And that's what that picture is about, the labor, the energy that goes into supporting, these ideas that we have about ourselves or want to have about ourselves. But again, that picture, it's partly observational. It's, it's documentary in a sense, but it's also, there's an intervention. And I guess I'm just more interested in the staging, the choreography that exists in real life and how meaningful that actually is. When you get that holiday card in the mail, it is deeply revealing of how that family wants to be seen, Maybe
Absolutely.
maybe not the kids, because they're just doing it, you know.
Right,
They're probably bribed to do it. But like, it is meaningful, right? Because it's like, oh, this is how they want to be perceived. This is the conversation they want to put themselves. This is the visual iconography that they are willingly making themselves a part of. I mean, they're paying a photographer to do it, right? It's like something is at stake there. And I guess that's what I'm interested in. Not the idea that there are no like truths or anything like that.
Tell me about working on assignment, because I know you have, or I perceive it this way, that you have a pretty rigorous assignment practice. And you know, I love seeing your pictures when I come upon them. I'm like, I know that guy. So tell us a little bit about how that started and how that integrates in your life.
Yeah, so I love working on assignments. I think it's often just a really interesting challenge. You know, it's almost like practice in some ways. There is a huge range. So some things are an assignment that you do because, you know, it's a day rate and it's like, go photograph this woman in her office or whatever. You know, it's the CEO. It doesn't have that much connection to, you know, my art, my fine art, I guess.
Yep.
Other ones, there's like, you know, as you become known, as your style becomes more known, the great thing is that people reach out to you, editors reach out to you because they want your style, right? And so like I shot a story for the New York Times Magazine, the kids' New York Times Magazine, about high school mascots, which was so funny. But that was perfect because I'd actually already been photographing cheer teams, and the mascot is like part of the cheer team. And so that was an assignment where I made the work for the New York Times Magazine, and I made pictures for myself. And there are 2 pictures that made it into the children's melody. And then there are actually assignments that I pitch because they're things I want to photograph for my art. So, you know, one, for instance, was like, I really wanted to go. So I moved back to Austin, where I'm from, and I went to elementary school, you know, nearby. When I went there, it was called Robert E. Lee Elementary, and it was renamed Russell Lee Elementary after the FSA photographer Russell Lee, who founded the program at UT, which is like,
that's awesome.
I know, for me, it was just amazing. And so I knew I wanted to photograph there and go back, and I photographed the school programs, like the plays. And that was something I pitched the New York Times opinion section, and actually did a photo essay and wrote a piece for them about that. And most of the pictures that they ran are not necessarily ones that I used, although there is some overlap, I should say. But that was something where it was like, I was pitching it because I really wanted to go photograph that. I was going to photograph it anyway. And so trying to, you know, for certain groups, having a story or publicity is really helpful. I did that for Cotillion. I've been shooting at Cotillion all last year, and I pitched that. And the New York Times did a photo essay about Cotillion that ran this last summer. And that was, again, something where it was like, I was going to be doing that anyway, but for the people at the Cotillion, actually having a story in the New York Times was a huge, that was a huge boon for them. So there's a combination, you know, there's a spectrum. But, you know, it's interesting on assignment which images they run. Because sometimes there's overlap, you know, but sometimes, you know, when you're doing a story, it has to illustrate certain points.
Yes,
and
of course.
The pictures, they can't be too ambiguous. They can't be too weird.
Right.
And of course, for my own work, that's exactly the metric I'm using. It's like, how weird is this? And so often the pictures are very different. The ones that get picked for the editorial story and the ones that I use.
Tell me about, and I'm sure this works for both editorial and your own work. And as you're saying, there's quite a bit of crossover, but about sort of embedding yourself in these various communities. How do you I know there's a lot of people who would like to move in that way with their work, but don't know how to do that, don't have maybe even the confidence, which is understandable, to present themselves to some group. How do you find your way in?
Yeah, that is a huge amount of the work. That is a huge amount of my practice. I would say the actually photographing is a pretty small percentage of what I actually do.
Yeah.
And some of it takes a lot of work. Like when I was in graduate school, I wanted to photograph Boy Scouts. I emailed every Boy Scout troop in Connecticut that I could find an email for. Most of them did not respond.
I'm sure that was fraught.
a few responded and were like, "You're a creep. Like, don't email us again." Yeah. I was like, "Oops." And one Scoutmaster, it was like, "This sounds really interesting. Come present to the parents at one meeting, show your work, tell us what you're doing, and then you'll leave and we'll vote."
Scoutmaster was not risk averse.
Yeah. I think he just was interested in photography. But the parents, I presented my work, my portfolio to the parents. I explained what I was doing and they voted and said, okay, you can come back. So I would come back every week. A lot of the groups on photographing, because there's these organized activities, affinity groups, they'll meet like once a week, for an hour after school or something, or, Cotillion met on Sundays. And it's challenging because you only get an hour, of actually shooting. But what's great is that it's like, it's going to be repeated in some version the next week. So generally the first couple of times I shoot, I'm not very satisfied with what I get. I'm still learning what's the cadence, what's the choreography, what's the routine, when are you going to get the good pictures? And so being able to go back to all those different meetings is extremely helpful, because I can go home, I can look at the pictures, I can see what works, what didn't work, what I missed. And it's become a very helpful way to hopefully make effective pictures.
Are you showing the work to the folks who you're embedded with as you're going along? Sometimes
they'll ask to see them. And because I am shooting with strobes, the reaction I almost always get is, I'll show them, they'll say, hey, can I see that? And I'll show them the back of my camera, because I'm shooting digitally, and they go, what? Or whoa. Because it just, they're not used to how it's going to look, right? And
right, of course.
If you're photographing, especially if it's in a well-lit room or outside or something, the flash is just like a little blip. They hardly notice it. And when you see it in the image and it's the only light source, it's just very... It's very unusual, I think. And I often give them JPEGs, like not the images I use, but I'll give them JPEGs that they can use for, Instagram or Facebook. I photographed ROTC here at UT, and I gave them a bunch of images that they could use. Of course, I think they weren't the pictures. I don't think they loved them because they weren't this like heroicization of it.
No, definitely not.
But I try to make it worthwhile for other people.
It's like the Twilight Zone version of ROTC.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I try to make it feel like, I think there's this debate in photography and in art, because I teach in an art school, that like photography is inherently subtractive or exploitative, or relies on like taking things away from people, taking ownership, possession of their image. And obviously there's some truth to that, but I just think it becomes such a reductive conversation. And I try to make my practice, helpful to other people, and the people who are generous enough to give me their time, their effort, their attention. I try to like make it worthwhile for them in some way.
Yeah, I think we're moving away from that.
I think so too.
Yeah, into much more collaborative. And of course, many artists were always working with collaboration in mind. And so I think, as usual, with discussions around many things in life, but just talking about art, sometimes we get onto something and get a little extreme in our views.
Yes,
but so, yeah, I wanted to just ask you also about working with different, because each of your books has been published by a different publisher. So each time you're working with different teams. How has that been for you, that sort of intense collaboration with different folks each time you work on a book?
Yeah, it's been great. And it's one of the reasons why I've worked with different people is I've just learned so much from all of them. And they're all so different as publishers, designers, teams. And when I first started out, like my first book with Aaron Morell, I was so much more like tightly wound. I needed so much more control. And what I found, subsequently is like, I actually like giving up some of that control and like seeing what someone else would do with the edit, with the design.
Yeah, it's another collaboration, right?
Absolutely. And I think when I was younger, I was so resistant to that. And now I'm actually fascinated by it. And of course there are some things that are like, no, that picture has to be in there. Or like, of
course.
No, I prefer my sequence, and, not being like totally spineless, but just, it's been so amazing to help other people showing me things that I didn't see in the work, especially with design. I mean, it's been so interesting to see the work framed or reframed or changed. And I would honestly like to work with like every publisher I admire at some point in my life, my career. Like I think there's, kind of maybe a standard approach, which you see in photography, you see in filmmaking, like actors always working with certain directors. But like that seems to be kind of the standard thing is like you find someone you work well with and you work well with them over and over again. I think that there's a lot of value to that, a lot of merit. But I think there's also a lot of value to working with other people and just seeing different versions of your work, I think is really interesting.
Well, certainly, I mean, the most recent book that you did with Nomic is very, just sort of starts out on a much more designed note.
Absolutely.
So with a cover that unfolds into a poster, and which is really wonderful. And so, I'm sure it's very exciting to go in and sort of hear from other people what they're thinking. So, Eli, thank you. I think I really just love talking with you. I could definitely do an episode with you on truth in photography, but I didn't want to give you too much of a hard time today. So
no, that was great.
Just getting you warmed up for that. But
that flew by, Sasha.
I know. It does for me when I'm having a good time. But one last thing I did want to ask you about, sort of a little outside of our conversation, but I had taken some notes about it. How do you think about exhibitions compared to a book? Because I know you've said, because I have it written down right in front of me, that it doesn't need to be a summation or a culmination in the same way a book often is of a whole body of work. So how do you think about mounting an exhibition of something very, take the 4 pillars, which is sort of the book itself is, for all the ways in which it is hard to penetrate, is also very much its thing, as all of your bodies of work are, all your books are. So how do you think about exhibition versus a book? Yeah,
it's a great question. And I guess I think if you try to make them equivalent, it's not going to work, right? Unless it's like some retrospective book or some exhibition where it's like, oh, I'm just doing the whole book. Or,
right,
I know Gregory Halpern, who, I listened to his episode you did where he had the sketchbook, Omaha sketchbook, where it's like, it was just the book on the wall, which was beautiful. But I think unless you're doing that, it's just an opportunity to do something different or to highlight different aspects of it. And I think that's what's exciting about working, at different exhibitions, different spaces. I mean, we don't think about photography as being like site specific in the way that other, sculpture is maybe, but I really think it's like, okay, well, how many images are going to fit here? And what if it's only 6, what can I do with 6 pictures? If it's 20, what can I do with 20 pictures? And just thinking about, I think in music analogies all the time, which is ridiculous because I'm like the least musical person in the world. I'm completely tone deaf. But it like a concert, they have those concerts where it's like, we're playing the whole album, but most concerts are not that at all. And you have to think about like, okay, well, what's this concert? How big is the venue? Like, what's going to play here? What instrumentation can I have? Just like trying to curate that experience, but not make it a replacement for the book. And if you like the work, you can go get the book and look at 60 pictures instead of, 12 or whatever. Do you think about including more clues for the viewers in an exhibition setting? Do you feel you owe that in any way to the venue? Yeah, well, it's funny because what I alluded to earlier when people like came up to me and complained, those were both at exhibition. Both the people who did that was at exhibitions. And, I was obviously there at the time. So, I was there, I was available. But, generally there's a press release that I work with, the gallerist or the curator or whatever. And there's usually someone there at these spaces, to give you talk about the work on your behalf. Yeah. And so there is some framing there usually, or if it's a group exhibition, there's usually some kind of write-up or conceptualization about what this stuff is. So I think that is available to you, if you're in the exhibition space. But I guess I still just don't want it to become like a one-to-one. Like, I'm just trying to break the images with the literal. I guess for me, what would be a successful outcome is if you went to my exhibition, you went to a show or looked at my book and felt like you knew less about the world. Like the world was actually more complicated than you had originally believed, as opposed to like, oh, I get it. It's been simplified and I understand it. And is that because nuance? I mean, do you worry that people make assumptions about other groups of people that are unfair, and that nuance lends commonality or compassion? Or
What's the target there?
Yeah, I mean, I think thinking about commonalities, like what these people share, like what we all share. And I think for me, photography has made me much more empathetic. You know, I've always been interested in the idea of archetypes, stereotypes, you know, icons. But then when you actually photograph real people, right, who's like the cheerleader at the top of the pyramid or the high school, you know, quarterback, these archetypes, and we flatten those people, right? We see that, you know, and when you actually have to photograph the real human being who is occupying that role, who exists, and you think about who they are as an individual, what their hopes and fears and dreams and anxieties are, it just completely changes, I think, how you think about the world and people.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. And I think it's, you know, photography's superpower is to make the world smaller in a good way and bring us together.
And here's just one of my all-time favorite photographers, my heroes, is Chris Killip. And I think he is a great object lesson in, like, you look at In Flagrante or In Flagrante 2, this mixing of photographs. They're all so obviously connected, and they paint this incredible portrait of, you know, England, you know, struggling, you know, post-industrial England struggling. But then, you know, now, you know, since that book, and obviously since he passed away, they've published, I have his books right next to me, Sea Coal, Skin and Grove, The Station, his book about, you know, punk photographs. And I always buy those books because I love those pictures and I want to have as many of those pictures as possible. But none of them compare to the complexity of In Flagrante, you know, because they become much more documentary, right? They become more about thinking about what makes a group unique or special or different versus like what connects all these people. So like to me, when you look at In Flagrante, it's like an incredibly powerful experience. And I guess that is the model of what I'm trying. Maybe I'm just ripping off Chris Killip, but that is the model of what I'm trying to do, I think.
Well, great artists borrow from other artists. That's the way it's got to be, right? Yeah, no, I think that's a really great example. And yeah, beautiful. Happy to hear his name brought up and thrown out for folks. Okay, Eli, we're going to wrap it up here. So thank you so much for hanging out with me this morning. And yeah, it's been great talking with you.
No, thank you so much, Sasha. I really, really appreciate it.
Okay, be well.
Take care.
PhotoWork with Sasha Wolf is a production of the PhotoWork Foundation. Executive producer is Sasha Wolf, and the associate producers are Taylor Salzback and Noah Lynn. The show is also produced and edited by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. Music is by J. Walter Hawks. If you like the show and wish to find out more about the Foundation, please visit photowork.foundation and be sure to subscribe and review with all the stars on your listening platform.